New York's classic rock, Q1043.
He was a producer of Mark Bolan and T-Rex, the Moody Blues, Paul McCartney and Wings. In fact, he scored the orchestration for Band on the Run. But Tony Visconti is best known as the longtime producer and collaborator of the wonderful David Bowie. We just celebrated what would have been his 75th birthday. We lost him too soon, 6 years ago, 2 days before the release of his final and 26th album, Black Star, and just about a month after the New York Theater Workshop debuted Lazarus. Tony, first of all, welcome. It's an honor to meet you.
Thank you. Thank you for welcoming me.
And even to this day, David Bowie, I just read, was the top-selling vinyl album seller of the 21st century, even topping the Beatles. Probably not a surprise to you.
Well, it's almost an unfair competition because the Beatles sold the bulk of their stuff years ago, and haven't made a record since Abbey Road. And David was current right up until 2015 and still making music and had plans to make more. And he was beloved. I mean, so many people worshipped him, and quite rightly. He was just an amazing artist, a genius, a sweet person. Actually, he was a very kind person. So it's a no-brainer that he was loved by millions and millions of people.
You are one of the people who knew him best. What would we find most surprising about the David Bowie we didn't know?
Well, I mean, if you met him in the street or just under very casual circumstances and it was just you and him, he would just start a conversation that would be very friendly and kind. And he would ask you what you do, because I mean, you probably have. Well, he's witnessed this before. People do meet him by chance and they just freeze up. They can't say a word. I've seen it myself. And I saw him once, he actually put his hand on someone's arm and he said, "I know." They just froze.
Of course, David Bowie. All right, tell us about your first meeting with him. When was that and how did it come about?
Well, he wasn't so famous then. He was he just turned 21. And I was a couple of years older than him. And our mutual kind of a boss, this guy, David Platts, was David Bowie's music publisher. And I worked for the same production company. And they basically, I was told by Mr. Platts that they didn't know what to do with David Bowie. He was all over the place. And he needed some focus, and he needed someone to really work with him and get him corralled into a certain direction. So he played some music and I had to agree with him. David was all over the place. He sounded like a Broadway musical star. Then he could sing rock and roll. Then he could sing folk music. And, later on, it would be easier to integrate this on later albums. But in the beginning, we really did need a focus. And I was starting out already as a rock record producer, so let's go in that direction, which we did our best to on that very first album that I produced with him.
It always amazes me. David Bowie was so much ahead of his time, and particularly at the end, because here he was creating an album about death and a musical that dealt with death. This is an issue that nobody wants to talk about, and he faced it head on.
Yes, he did.
What was that like for you? Because you experienced that. You knew he was ill about a year before he passed?
Yes, yeah. Well, maybe about 6 months. We had a few rehearsals with Donnie McCaslin and his band, the band that played the backing on Black Star. And about a day or two before we began recording, David announced that he was really ill. And but he said he was going for therapy, and he was very optimistic that he was going to live, and just let me know that he might be leaving early some days from the studio if his energy ran out. So he had to console me during that meeting. I lost it, when he told me that. And the next day he told the band, and it took me 24 hours to gain my equilibrium, because I was in total grief about that news. And the band took it well. They kind of looked at each other, and no one expected someone to say that they were dealing with a very serious disease that could be terminal. I mean, at that point, as I say, David was optimistic, and we all were, on his behalf, that he would get through this. And he did amazingly well through the next 4 months of recording. He was really in top form, especially his voice. His voice never lessened. He always had power in his lungs, and his range was amazing. So, it was something we dealt with, and who knew how it was going to end? It was just a day-to-day reassurance that he was still with us, and he was still eager to record and to create music. And I've never seen him smile so much, actually. He was really having time of his life. He was really enjoying it, because he was making a kind of a jazz album, and he was always deep in his roots. He was always a jazzer, and he wanted to make an album with top people, in which he was doing at that time. So he was very, very happy.
Were you told it was liver cancer that killed him?
Well,
right?
it's I don't know. I don't know the exact thing. It might have been not. I think it just was somewhere else, maybe stomach, and it metastatized. It just went out of control.
Did you have conversations with him about death?
Since I met him, we had conversations about death.
Wow.
Both of us were into Tibetan Buddhism, and we studied with the same Tibetan Lama. And the Tibetan Buddhist religion is all about the impermanence of life, how no matter how long you think you're going to live, it can happen at any time, and you should always live life as if it's your last day and prepare yourself for death. And a lot of people, of course, in the West are in complete denial. They think, oh, I'm never going to die. I mean, it's so far off in the future. And, you could just walk in front of a New York City bus the next minute, you don't know. So it is a good philosophy to live life that death is inevitable, and live each day as if it was your last. And, tie up all the bows and ribbons and knots, and make peace with everyone you love, and peace with people who you've offended, which he was doing. And I try to do it myself, He phoned a lot of people. I learned after his death that he made loads of phone calls to everyone he worked with, old friends, and he was just having a chat, just making amends, just in case there was anything out there that was not well between him and his friend. And so, gosh, he was doing all the right things.
Something we can learn from. I'm speaking with Tony Visconti, the longtime producer and collaborator of David Bowie, who should be celebrating his 75th birthday this year. We lost him 6 years ago. Wow. What was your last conversation with David?
He phoned me about 2 weeks before Christmas, and said that he was in great shape. He was very happy. He was spending it with his family. And he said, I've got some new songs. And I went, oh, that's fantastic. He says, yeah, well, let's meet up after Christmas, after New Year's, and we'll get together and I'll play them for you. That meeting never took place. So, our phone conversation was about 12 minutes long. We had a nice chat about everything, personal stuff, musical stuff. And it was confidential. I won't reveal any more than that.
Okay, because my next question was going to be, there obviously could be new music from David Bowie since he had written it.
I don't know. I haven't heard them. And I know the way he wrote. He never wrote lyrics or melodies. It was just beats and chord changes. So somewhere on a hard drive in his home is the framework for a potential song, but he used to like to he would take that much into a studio And as we collectively worked on it, meaning the band and myself, it started to emerge into something that inspired him to even give it a title and to write some basic lyrics about it and a melody. And that way, I think he's different than every other songwriter I worked with who they have to write everything at home and then come to the studio with finished songs. He gave that up in the 70s, coming to a studio with a finished song. He might have one with lyrics and all that, and then it would be a springboard to how the rest of the album would turn out. And I didn't like that at first. Like every record producer, you want to know what you're working with. And if your artist books time in the studio and says, I don't have a clue what we're going to work on, let's just go to the studio. That was disarming for me. That was, a little awkward for me, but I got used to it years and years ago. That's how every David Bowie album began since Ziggy Stardust, those days. It was just working on the fly. It was great.
That's crazy creative. Could you envision the Bowie estate allowing you to work with whatever was left to make a new creation?
I don't know. That would be very hard. As I said, we would only have backing tracks, and who's going to write the songs? Who's going to sing the songs? I don't know. There are probably tracks that I didn't work on, that other producers worked on, that haven't been released from long ago. I know there were always leftover tracks on an album, and I think around the time of when we made Heathen, you were into this thing which suddenly happened to the music industry, where besides releasing your album, you needed bonus tracks. And then you also, if his company was Sony, you needed special tracks for Japan only. And then we used everything we recorded to make these all these things we had to have music ready for. So say an album has 12 songs. So we needed 4 or 5 bonus tracks. We needed that track for Japan. And so there's nothing left over from Heathen or Reality or any album we made since then. They've all been released. So something earlier than 2000 might be unreleased. And I didn't make albums like Tonight and Outside. So I don't know. Only those people know what was left off those albums. And I know that stuff was left off the work he did with Brian Eno on Outside. There are extra tracks. It's up to the Bowie estate what they want to do, and they are looking after it very responsibly, and they do want to release new stuff. And they did work with the pop-up shops, the Worcester Street pop-up shop and all that. So they know how much he's loved, and they love him, and the fans would like to get some extra stuff if they could.
And actually, you were involved with the reissuing of 5 albums. And this reissuing is unlike other reissuings I've heard of, because the reissue, which you can stream on some platforms, sounds like you are listening to the live music in progress.
Yes. These albums have been released in the Sony 360 system, which is you hear music you're in the middle of a 360-degree circle. And so I remixed the music for this purpose so that you'll get more of an immersive feeling. So what you will hear on the average mix, not in every mix maybe, but you'll hear David not just in the front speakers, you'll hear him right closer to you. I could bring him in the mix closer to your face. And sometimes if he sang a harmony, I could put the second David Bowie behind you, over your right shoulder, and you could hear him singing harmony to the David in front of you. So I could do all these oral tricks, which you can't do in common ordinary stereo. And the effect is absolutely stunning. I could even spread out the instruments more so that they don't all conglomerate in the front of you. So I could have a whole string orchestra behind you, and you hear every viola, violins, cellos, and you never lose focus of David, who is, of course, the loudest and the most focused sound in the mix. It was total fun doing these things. Actually didn't take so long because I knew all these albums like the back of my hand. I've just a way of presenting them in a more of a cinematic format. And that would actually be a good way to listen to them. If there'll probably be virtual concerts where they have these enormous speakers in the cinema, and what you can hear on headphones will be just gigantic in a cinema. So I'm looking forward to that happening.
Well, I thank you so much, Tony Visconti. It's been an absolute joy and revelation on some levels speaking with you this morning. When we come back, I will introduce you to Barbara Rosen. She's a longtime critical care nurse and nurse educator, and she will be talking about the stress, the exhaustion, and even the violence that has been plaguing nurses on the front lines of COVID. That's next, Q104.3.
New York's classic rock, Q104.3.